probably know by now, I am half Chinese, and in addition to being Asian racially, I am also Asian culturally, in that until I was a preteen, I lived in Hong Kong, where my dad is from. And the left nowadays has this whole idea that you cannot comment about an issue that affects a community unless you yourself are part of that community. Now, I personally think that's BS and that anyone should be able to talk about whatever they want, but still, considering all of my Asian qualifications, I would like to see them try to dismiss me here, which I mean, they're still going to, but I at least think it's harder for them to do that. Now, as I was saying, there's recently been a huge uptick in assaults against Asian Americans. And despite what the left may try to tell you, no, this is not the fault of white supremacy. Want to know how I know that? Well, most of the attackers in these cases have actually been black. And now trying to blame white people for black people attacking Asian people is a level of mental gymnastics that honestly is only possible in 2021 because it seems like society has collectively lost their minds. And what's also frustrating about this situation and the whole hashtag Stop Asian Hate campaign is that I have been speaking out against anti-Asian discrimination for years, but until it was politically convenient, it seems like not only did the left ignore this discrimination, they were actually enabling it. And here I am talking about affirmative action policies that blatantly and systemically discriminate against Asians in North America and in Europe. Did you know, and I'm guessing most of you do by now, that if you are Asian, it's actually harder to get into elite schools because Asians, on average, tend to do very well scholastically and academically. And so to prevent schools from being too Asian, as if that were a thing that non-racists would ever think, school admissions boards have actually made it harder to get into these schools if you are Asian. For example, if there were two students who were exactly the same, had the same grades and the same extracurricular activities, statistics show that if one was black and one was Asian, the black student would be way more likely to get into that school. And not only would the black student be more likely to get into that school with the same grades as the Asian, but even if the black student wasn't as successful academically, they would still be more likely to get into that school. Now, this is a huge problem in the Asian community. It's such a big problem that there's actually been lawsuits filed by Asians against these schools for discriminating against them. And yet the left has been silent about this forever, essentially. And not only have they been silent, but again, these policies, these affirmative action policies, have been their idea. They have been the ones who've been trying to promote this BS. And sure, the left now may be saying praises of the Asian community and trying to stand in solidarity with them, but if you look a little deeper into their ideology, you can see that no, the woke left is no friend of the Asian community. Recently, I posted online that the reason why Asians tend to succeed in so many countries, not just Western ones, is that their cultures tend to place a lot of value on family and education. Having grown up in an Asian household in Asia, I can tell you it was never a question of whether I would go to college. It was always just that is the expectation that I was going to meet. And I remember my father expressing disappointment in me, not in me, but in my grades when I would get anything below a 95. There was always this huge focus on succeeding academically because my parents knew, and I knew as a result of that, that would benefit me later on in life. And not only that, but as someone who grew up in Asia, I have to say I had never met a child whose parents were divorced or single until I moved back to North America, right? The huge explosion of single parent households that we see in the West, it just isn't comparable to anything that's going on in Asia or, as a matter of fact, actual Africa itself either. These are huge cultural differences that, yes, do affect the likelihood of people succeeding. For pointing this out on social media, I was bombarded with racist hatred. I'm going to include some screenshots of the things that I was called right here. You can take all of this in. And what was ironic is that not only was I being accused of eating cats and dogs, which, by the way, Asian people don't eat cats. It is unfortunately just the dogs. But I was also accused of things like trying to kiss up to white people, be a white bootlicker, and all of that. So it's like not not only am I not allowed to stand up to anti-Asian discrimination when it comes to things like affirmative action, but I also can't even defend Asian communities for just working hard and earning their success, because then in the minds of the left it's somehow demeaning to other cultures. But it's like, I hate to break it to you, but yes, individual responsibility and personal choices do affect the way your life is going to turn out. All right, it's not popular to talk about this, and that's why I admire people like Candace Owens for at least trying. But single motherhood in the Black community is rampant right now. I think it's around 3/4 of Black children are born to single parent households. Regardless of your ethnicity, being a single parent unfortunately makes it a lot more likely that you're going to be raising your child in poverty. And it's not a big question as to why that's true. I mean, just think about it. Of course, it's going to be harder to provide for a child when you're just one person instead of two. Now, this is a huge reason why, in my opinion, well, not just my opinion, but because of facts, why Black people are disproportionately hit by poverty. But guess what? The rate of Black single motherhood wasn't always what it is now. So I know when it comes to any social problem, the left likes to point to the past and say, see, this is what happened 400 years ago, ergo problems now. But these are problems that have actually gotten worse the more that society has become integrated and less racist. If we look back to the 1950s, Black families were so much more intact than they are now. And of course, discrimination was more back then. So no, you can't tell me that all of the problems facing the Black community are due to systemic racism, when as systemic racism has decreased, these problems have only gotten worse, all right? So that's what I have to say about the whole family issue. Now let's talk about education. I am someone who has been very open about my criticisms of the public education system. And it's one of the reasons why I'm a huge supporter of school choice, because there are bad schools in these inner cities, schools that do not help their students succeed. But the thing is, even when they are in the same school system and heck, the same school, Asian children are still a lot more likely to graduate. We're not even talking about marks, but just graduate than their white, Black, or Hispanic counterparts, right? So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be working to improve schools, because of course we should be, but part of the strive for education needs to start at home, all right? I'm sorry, but regardless of how much you cry about being a victim, if in your home you're not doing the best for your children, encouraging them to finish school, telling them it's important, and explaining them that if they want to have kids, it's going to be a lot easier with a long-term stable partner, then there are going to be problems. Another thing that's interesting to bring into this whole conversation is the fact that, impressively, Nigerian immigrants are one of the most successful immigrant groups once they come to America. So, when we talk about Black culture, what I think people need to realize is that there is no one unified Black culture. Culture in Black American neighborhoods is, of course, not the same as what it is in Nigerian neighborhoods, and there's a huge difference between them. Thankfully, the United States is open and accepting enough that when Nigerian Americans do come over here, they are able to succeed because this is not a racist place, and they are a hard-working culture that does value things like family and education. I pointed this out online, and someone actually had the gall to say that it's not because Nigerians tend to value education and family that they're successful. No, it's actually because when they come over, white people just haven't had a chance yet to oppress them. And it's like, white people are not the root of all evil. Asian people are also not the root of all evil. For some reason now, among Black people and Asian people, there's this competition to see who got discriminated against more. And that's something that's also brought up a lot when we talk about Asian success, is that, oh yeah, well, even though they got discriminated against, it still wasn't as bad or for as long as Black Americans, therefore we can't even compare it. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. No. Asians weren't allowed to immigrate or become citizens up until shockingly recently. Couples that were Asian and white, like my parents, weren't allowed to marry again until shockingly recently. Technically, it was illegal for someone half Asian and half white like myself to even exist. So you don't get to dismiss Asian success by saying that Asians weren't discriminated against, because we were, and you don't get to say that it's based on white people just liking us better, because that's absolutely not the case. I've heard that Asians are just successful because of their proximity to whiteness, and it's like, are you trying to tell me that Indian Americans, who are one of the most successful groups, are seen as more white than Black Americans? Is that honestly what you're trying to tell me? Asians were being attacked on the street for months, and the media essentially said nothing about it. The left did nothing about it until a white person killed some Asians, and all of a sudden it became politically expedient for them to launch this huge hashtag Stop Asian Hate campaign, framing it as this white supremacy problem. Asians, the woke left, are not your friends. I'm not saying you have to go full-on conservative, even though, I mean, obviously I think you do, but just understand that the left is perfectly okay with discriminating against you. They are perfectly okay with barring you or your children or your family members from getting into a good school because you are Asian. They love to rail against how racist merit-based immigration is, even though that tends to favor Asians more. And to top it all off, when Asians do manage to get into good schools despite the literal barriers against them, what does the woke left do? Oh yeah, they dismiss Asian success as proximity to whiteness. Okay, no, do not fall for all the hashtag campaigns and the platitude and the patronizing attitudes. The woke left is not your friend. We have seen the woke left rail against white people for years and years now, and trust me, Asians are next on the chopping block as soon as any political maneuvering from this current love fest is over. That's pretty much all I have to say for now, though, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps me out so much. Until next time.